Hello and welcome to your introduction to your first project in this course. So what we've got on the screen right now is a previous iteration of this very project that I've done in the past. I'm going to be using a couple different files to speed up on time for what it is that I'm trying to show you guys, but basically you're going to take a finished object. This is where your video is going to stop, and you're going to break it up in Adobe Illustrator by retracing this object in unique layers so that it can build together within After Effects, and that's the idea that we're going to get here. So we can see within this first video, we've got some really cool repetition going on. There is a visual language that's happening. You can see this is nice and even for the viewer's eyes to be able to watch throughout the entire thing. There's a lot of instruction within the assignment sheet about how to think about this movement and what's going on and what's building in. You want to make sure that you don't have objects that are looping in like a bee on a sort of a spirally path. You want to make sure that when you are thinking about motion language, see how I'm directing the viewer's eye down, everything's landing down. You can have things come in from an angle, but every time that you introduce a new direction or a new way that things are moving, that's like adding to the motion language that's happening within this animation. More on that later when we get into After Effects. So first thing that you're going to want to do with this project is go to the internet and start looking around for different retro items. Pinterest, if you don't already have a login for them, is an absolutely great resource for looking at these types of objects. We're looking for real retro objects, not objects that are made to look retro. There's a whole bunch of different shapes here. Some of them are going to work better than others. You want to make sure that you're not doing anything with too many small details like this watch here. Those small buttons to animate those coming in aren't really going to make that large of a visual impact, but you want something that's good and knobby. So sort of like this, or this keyboard could work fairly well also. Try not to get one that has hundreds of different buttons and things like that on there. But we're trying to look at this right from the get-go and think of interesting ways that this object can appear. Also, if you look at the assignment, I've linked out a bunch of other different project examples that I've done for this in the past. Now, if you look on Google, you're going to see that, yeah, it's still got some good stuff. Pinterest, kind of by far the best one. What I'd recommend also is that you don't just type in retro object or retro electronics. Try and do a specific year like 1940s electronics, 1950s electronics, 1960s, 1980s can work pretty good if you're looking for a whole bunch of boom boxes and Walkmans, but that's going to help you get a little bit more specific with your search. So for those of you who have never used Adobe Illustrator before, this is going to be a quick example of how to be able to get your file structure and stuff like that set up within Adobe Illustrator. I'm going to pause it at one point here in a second, go through, draw more of the object, and then resume so that you don't have to sit here and watch me with the pen tool clicking around forever. So the first thing that I want to start off by doing is, it's not already, take my pixels and make sure that this is set to pixels within Adobe Illustrator. Next up, we've got 1920 by 1080. That's a good screen size for us to be able to work in. We're not going to be using CMKY since we're not printing any of this stuff. This is for use in Adobe After Effects, so we're going to go ahead and create an RPG color. For this particular project, Illustrator is going to be the best path forward. Other projects that you do in here, Photoshop, might end up being quicker when we start working with more painterly stuff or cutting out images and doing collage type mix-up stuff. But for this one, Illustrator will work just fine. So the next thing I want to do, once my file is open, you can see that I've got my layers over here on the right-hand side. I'm going to go up to my left-hand side, though, and place my reference image that I've downloaded. Alrighty. So I think that this one should work pretty good for what it is that I'm trying to describe to you guys. So getting an object with some color regions that are broken up is probably going to be pretty useful for you. I'm just going to use my black arrow, select the object, and I'm going to hold shift to be able to scale up evenly on that object. I'm thinking about this 1920 by 1080 screen resolution. And I just want to place my object to where it's a good size. It's not overly large within the screen, but it fills it up in a nice way. There's something about breathable space within a screen that can be really, really nice to be able to watch. So as this thing comes in, I'm going to center it. And that's sort of where I want my layers to land. That'll give me a little bit of space on the bottom, a little bit of space on top. And now my Illustrator's just shut down. 1 second. Okay, so now that I've got my object placed and I want to create a new layer down here at the very bottom, you can see that there's a little plus symbol, and when I click on that, that's going to allow me to be able to create a new layer. There it is, got my first new layer in there. So from here I can lock my previous layer. I'm going to start working on layer 2. And what I want to think about when I'm creating these objects is, especially on one that's on an isometric view like this, that means that we can see the side, the front, and the top. And it's basically a cube is what I'm creating. When the object comes together, I want to think about how this object is going to fly in. That creates a base for the object. Generally, the front of the object is going to come in last, and that's going to be, I want to be able to see the interior of the object as that starts to actually build up on the screen. So let's go ahead and just start tracing some of the objects. I want to show this to you guys real quick on how to be able to do this. I'm hitting the I button on my keyboard to get to my eyedropper. I'm going to select one of my colors, get my pen tool, and then I'm just going to start tracing out my object. So I'm going to start, it's actually pretty difficult for me to do these things without building the base in first. And I'm going to start thinking about, what that base in this object is going to look like. So I just left click to be able to create a point. And then I'm going to click and drag to create some other points. If I click and drag, that allows me to be able to curve them. And if I want that curve to ever break at some time, I can do that by selecting the end of it. And that'll give me just a straight line moving forward without any kind of curvature on it. And so you can see what I'm doing here with this teal square is going in and creating a base to the object. And that's going to allow me to give something to drop in first, or to build first, and then build sort of the interior and the back walls of this object as they start to zoom in on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and give it a pause, and let's jump forward now, and I'll start to show you what some of these layers after I build them up look like, so you can get an idea of how I'm breaking these different pieces up into various layers, naming them, and then getting ready to import them into After Effects. All right, I think it's a good time to jump back in and show you what the progress on this first TV looks like when I'm talking about building up the different layers, right? Because we want this animation to have various stages as it's starting to actually build up. So what I've got here is I've got my back wall, that's somewhere around here. Oh, they're all locked. So I've got my back wall, and I can make that fly in from off the screen in kind of a unique way, or I can make it grow in depending on what I want. I've got this one that I can make drop down from the ceiling and land and kind of bounce as it actually arrives. I've got this one that I can have fly in from the side if I want to in sort of an interesting way. But here's where it gets really cool, right? So these layers here are not going to end up getting shown within the final animation, but this gives me a lot of fun stuff that I can do with these little pillars to have them drop in as the rest of the TV is starting to actually build itself. And then all of a sudden we're giving the audience sort of a midpoint before the exterior actually starts to build in. So you're really starting to take them on a journey. And I think that's a pretty smart way to be able to do this. Okay, so I'm going to get back to building this out, and then I'll show you some updates once it's actually finished. Okay, so now we've got the TV monitor completed, and you can see over here within my layers within After Effects that I've got everything kind of named out pretty well, and these are stacked in a way that I can start to build them within the After Effects program. Again, my screen is a 1920 by 1080. I've got just a solid background in here. I can go in and change that out later on once I actually start working within After Effects. But as I start to break these things down, you can see that I've got my screen on one level. It's called black screen. Got my shadows for the front of this thing. The front is all one piece. I've got my sides that are laid in there, and I've built it in a way that I can structurally put this thing together in a pretty unique fashion and really have it kind of fly in and build within After Effects. And that is the stage that you're going to be looking to have completed. All right, I hope that makes sense to you guys. I've also, just to show you, I've got the handle in its own little layer. I've got the side grills on their own little layer. And with things like that, I've got my buttons separated out on different types of layers so that they can fly in one by one. And we should be able to get a pretty good animation out of this. So I'm gonna stop this video. Next video will be inside of After Effects and covering the basic setup and how to get your files in there, as well as sort of looking at setting up initial keyframes.